Hello, my Periscopian friends. This is an interesting moment when I just realized that I just did a lengthy broadcast for Facebook. I have to admit, because it hit like 10, 15,000 people. But my most ardent friends happen to be in the Periscopian universe. So what am I to do? I probably have to just get two devices, which is just get two phones, Lance. Why don't I just get two phones? Let's make the agreement. Lance is getting two phones, so I can do these broadcasts and you can have them live. Anyway, I want to show you what I just did because it's so cool. It's when you take a map and you lay out your life in stages and you map it so that you could see where the convergence points are. You see, I believe that when you hit and understand the high points of your journey, observe the high points and you end up in flow. Now, flow is important because flow is when you're in the zone. Now, you also have other points in your life, don't you? And those are the low points. So those low points can be working against you. What happens in the low points? Well, in the low points, you experience, certain those are high points. The low points are disempowering. Those are moments of anger and fear and frustration, resentment, rejection, criticism, guilt. Those are just a few of the devils I've had to deal with. Although I made a list of all of them for your listening pleasure, including self-pity. But I've also experienced freedom and creativity and power and the strength of humor and love and what that does. And what I did was I put these together because when you have positive experiences, you're able to discover your gifts, talents, and abilities, and even things you never knew you had. So I like to do the observation of those points and the height. So for instance, we were looking here and noticing how, I'll just give an example. Let's just erase this illustration off of my desk here. And how about if we give you guys this? No, we'll give you something better than that. Hold on. Here we go. This is what I want. This. A blank sheet. This is your life. A blank sheet. So let's take a look at any life. And what I was looking at here was the life of Joseph. Or we could take David. Which one would you rather do? Give me your opinion. You want David or Joseph? Someone tell me. Which one do you want? Yeah, dig it out from a year ago. Whoever that's saying, dig it out. Because most people don't work with this stuff. They're not doing their homework. And see, the reason why this is so critical, let me show you something here. Look at this. Because your experiences in life shape your beliefs. Your experience about God as a deliverer. God is a good God. God rewards your sowing with reaping. If those are your beliefs, then you make different decisions in a crisis. And then during your decisions, you get different harvests. You get different results. But at the same time, you have experiences that might be getting in your way. We got equal Josephs and Davids and Joseph. Oh, you guys are a lot of help. Look at this. You got Joseph and David. Davy. Well, it looks like David and Joseph. Oh, man. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. I'll do... how about if I do Joseph, because he's only got 5 stages. So what you do is you take a look at your timeline here. And you're going to list the positive experiences when God was moving, and then you're going to look at the negative experiences, and down here, these are the negative experiences. But the negative experiences aren't necessarily always bad, and positive experiences aren't always good. How many of you know that sometimes temptation is initially a pleasant experience with a terrible price? But on the whole, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the life of Joseph. So Joseph has this extraordinary favor from Papa. Gives him this wonderful coat. His brothers are jealous of him, and so they throw him into a pit. The pit, however, before Judah can deliver him, he's out again, and he's delivered by an Ishmaelite slave trading group. They take him down into Egypt. And notice some of these points are lower than others. And however, he's delivered he's put into Potiphar's house from his slave labor in the field. But at Potiphar's house, even though he's got a good management job, he gets sent to prison. And in prison, he ends up taking over the prison by interpreting the dream. the leaders there. He's actually, because he's so good at what he does, he ends up interpreting the dream for the cupbearer and and the baker, and they get him before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, oh, here's an interesting point. Pharaoh then gives him his job promotion, and then he is there, and he has an emotional moment of crises, crying out when he sees his brothers, but he sets up a trap for them that brings them to ultimate fulfillment. And what you see is a life that has these various stages of ups and downs. Now, for those of you that want to know about, who was it, David? Well, let's see if we can get another paper here on David. Now, watch this. David has an even more interesting life. So here we're going to do the dotted line for David, and here's the pluses and minuses. David, for instance, starts off with, you guys get what I'm doing here? I'm talking about looking at your life in terms of the map. I'll forget David for the moment. We don't need to go into that. But you can imagine, David, of course, has the word from Samuel. Then he has Goliath he beheads. And then he becomes Saul's son-in-law. But then he's hunted by Saul with a javelin. And then he escapes the javelin and has an experience of breakthrough. But then he has to hide again. But then Israel starts to gather to him. Then he has a terrible day with Ziklag. And then he comes back out and becomes the king of all Israel. But then he screws up with Bathsheba. And Absalom rebels. But then he also gets to see Solomon's temple. So it's up and down and up and down. But at the end of the day, here's what I want you to catch. Your destiny is the trajectory of those high points. If you link them together, they tell you a story. Let me show you what I mean. Points here are actually connect you to the purpose of God. These points here are all redemptive on the bottom if you process them right. If you process them right, you enter flow. If you process them wrong, you get stuck in the wilderness and don't cross over. Does that make sense? If you don't deal with the enemy, then those positive emotions, those empowering states that you long for become elusive, and you end up stuck in competing commitments. What's competing commitments? When your highs and your lows are canceling out your journey, which means that by not processing these things, they actually counter these so that you end up in the transition zone, but never going into the promised land. This is so many believers are stuck in transition because they've never processed where they've been. They've never actually worked the experience out. Now, when you do work it out, what happens? You guys ready for this? I'm telling you, we got all kinds of stuff here for you. When you work it out, you move from sovereign foundations, which is God forming your time in history, your gender, your gift mix, into spiritual formation through ministry maturing. This is what's going on, by the way. During this process, God is doing something. Now, I explain all this in all this material that I got here. I explain it. But God is moving you through these experiences. And the Bible, I got Jordan Peterson has a great question. He says, would you rather have your children strong or safe? God wants you strong, and he doesn't necessarily keep you safe because we survive these experiences in order to go to new strength. And convergence is the phase when life maturing, I drew a picture here showing that this is supposed to be life maturing is when there's this, where life stuff happens. And sometimes it's a season of delay, and God allows the issues of the heart to come up in delay, preceding the entrance into convergence, which is the place where you're walking greater in alignment with the role, gifts, talents, and abilities that God had prepared for you before you were born. You could say that this is when Paul was set apart for the work versus just working on the work. And then you have afterglow, which is your later season of life, inspiring other people with the convergence story. This is all data-driven, folks. That's what I love about this. All this research that I got here is based on a decade and a half of working with constraint theory and convergence and integrating the two. And then, of course, the sozo, the inner healing, the deliverance stuff, and then the prophetic. And what's happening for many believers is, if you don't mind me saying so, that we're living in a time of history when nations are coming to maturity, sheep and goat nations, for instance, and Christians that aren't working through the process into convergence are getting in the way of their own availability and the time when they're needed most in history. So all of the move of God that we're looking for in this period is really culminating on a generation. And our generation is supposed to be paving the way for the millennials and for the generation following them to cross over. And I believe we're stuck. And we're stuck in the process because working out salvation generationally can happen where a generation comes flat up to its crossover point. I'll take a look at this. I'll show you exactly what I mean here. And you'll see it when I'm coming in a sense out of, so let's say this is the wilderness. This is the wilderness of the church age. And we've been working our way out with revivals and such like that. But there's a Jordan that we're crossing over. And then there's this land. Curiously enough, it says in Acts 7. Stevens calls it, he said there was a land flowing with promise, and it was the land, really a prophetic promise. The church in the wilderness had to cross over into the land, and he said there were 7 nations greater and mightier than them. And those of you that know our teaching on this know that we believe that these 7 mountains or these 7 nations actually make up the composite of nations. Crossing over, we're the crossover generation. We're stuck in this transition zone. And what's happening now politically in America is shocking because we have a leader who is able to bring America into its greatest day, but the church itself refuses to cross over fully behind that political moment. As a result, we have media as a false prophet. We have business, which is about to get shaken economically. We have education propagandizing the next generation of youth. And we have communities that are basically red or blue, depending upon whichever powers are dominating in the political sphere. And trust me, it'll have an eventual outcome for America economically. And in this whole grid, you have this process. Your job is to work out your salvation. You've got a job to do. And I realize we can't really affect as much of history as we'd like to have, but you can affect everything God has written in the books of heaven for your life. God has certain works for you to do, certain things for you to complete, certain assignments for you to complete, and they're all in the convergence zone. They're all in and the church is crossing over out of the land of wilderness wandering with our own little mountain out here and our own little activity, and we're crossing over. And where we're crossing over, we're seeing sheep nations form. It's important you get this. It's sheep nations or goat nations. Sheep nations or goat nations, depending on how the church crosses over in cities, in regions, and in nations. We're going to see the great outpouring of the Spirit of God in some nations. We're going to be all excited. And then we're going to be seeing other nations that are going to get more violent in their opposition to Christ. Why? Because nations are ultimately going to be sheep or goat nations. And the future isn't going to be determined by how many people hibernate in the church mountain, but how many cross over in transition into politics, law, journalism, art, into business and entrepreneurial activity, making jobs, creating jobs, solving problems, and of course social justice, which is resolving issues in such a way that that the kingdom of God and the freedom that Christ gives is established. And so we're coming to this decisive moment in history, and it all comes down to you taking heed to the call in your life and the work God called you to do and fulfilling it. Answering the calling that's on your life right now. If you're over 50, you're in the convergence zone. And if you're in any way stuck, it's okay, because what you'll find is this pattern of moving up and down like that, it intensifies as you come towards a kind of culmination. And for us in this hour, it's important that while we're looking with one eye, I certainly look at world events and comment on them. On the other hand, I'm coming back to what's the work that I'm called to do? What's the difference I'm called to make? What's the assignment I've got? Because at the end of the day, we're each accountable for the assignment. And I'm suggesting the assignment for many of you is going to be sheep nation curation, working in such a way that you're having an impact upon the spheres of influence around you. And the church is going to have to go from praying for to going into the systems. And that's going to be, that's going to be crazy. But here it is. It's right there in the Clinton model in terms of convergence for generations. Generations go through convergence. Joshua's generation crossed over. They were delayed, but they crossed over. And maybe we'll be seniors when we cross over, in which case it's really about us doing what we got to do for the sake of our next generation. What kind of world, what kind of country are we leaving them? So the Lord is going to show you more and more clearly about this is important, about what are the things that are holding on to you, because it's the unprocessed events. It's the personal history that gets in the way. And you'll find that there are spirits that are that the Lord wants to deliver you from, of anger or worry or frustration or criticism, that those disempowering emotions. Here's the danger of this, that when if you look at this, you'll see that when it comes time for destiny to knock on your door, we will put more energy into avoiding what causes pain and rejection than we will put into what is calling us into our destiny. In other words, people will, myself included, we will put more energy into avoiding rejection or pain or criticism than we will put onto the risk to pursue the future. And it doesn't happen all the time. It just happens in those critical moments when the door's there, when the opportunity's there. And we sabotage. And we sabotage because of that. Remember this sequence right here. It's the decisions we make that give us our harvest. But your beliefs about, is it God's timing? Is it God's will? Am I ready yet? Is this the moment? You have to build up a bank account of confident expectation through God proving himself and you proving yourself that you're reliable, that you can pull through, that you can do it. You have to have that identity in your experience. And so God gives you experiences that lock you into, yes, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. And that's where this graph becomes so important. I want you to get the Destiny dashboard graph. For those of you that have the Destiny dashboard product, you don't necessarily have this. LanceWallnau.com, and go check it out. But that's the Unlocking Your History is the name of that new resource. And I think what it comes with all my workbook stuff that you got here, plus the maps and the 3 hours of training. And this is kind of, this is like, if you guys get a hold of this, anyone who grabs this stuff can probably, I'll tell you, if you're a preacher, a teacher, a coach, if you're an inspirational assistant or a dream interpreter for anybody, this stuff is like internet gold. Grab it and do like most people do. Customize it and use it, and you'll sound like a genius. Because this stuff isn't all mine. It's just a powerful integration of Bobby Clinton, M.D. Flippin, some of Anthony Robbins' stuff that I went to back 10 years ago to see what he was doing in coaching, and then went through some very intense processing work with So-So and prophetic and deliverance ministries to see how do these things come together. And basically it's a vast resource, including some of the Hudson Institute and some executive coaching stuff. It's probably it's like $70,000 worth of my journey, all reduced into my manuscripts for you guys. Grab it, run with it, use it, and teach it. And as you teach it, you'll learn it. As you teach other people, you'll get it yourself. Because this is the hour when we got to go into that promised land. Get the highs and the lows mapped out in your journey. Because if you take heed to yourself and to the teaching, then what Paul was saying is so powerful to Timothy. Take heed to yourself and the teaching. And you're not only going to save yourself, you're going to save everyone that hears you. You're going to be a source of life and salvation to people around you. Grab it, man. I love this stuff. And it's my prayer that you're going to be able to teach this stuff and bring other people into accurate deliverance, accurate prophetic alignment. And you'll see patterns. What I'm trying to get to you is the patterns in Joseph's life, in David's life. It was all moving in a trajectory. It was taking him to something. You could almost predict the next step in the chapter once you look at the patterns. All right. Well, sorry for keeping up late unless you're in Australia. And I'll talk to you guys later on. Bye-bye.